This is an exciting day for Football Canada, and it's an exciting day for me because I get to introduce these guys and the Elite NeuroKinetix project, working in concert with Football Canada on making football not only a safer game, but a better game. And it all comes down to our introduction back at the Canada Cup in the summer in Kingston. And we actually met on Twitter. Remember that?
That's
we
right.
met on
Twitter
and started sending messages back and forth. The same way that I found my co-host Gord Randall for the TV show we do on TSN. But the most important thing was when I met you, your passion for the game is unstoppable. Tell me about how your passion has driven you forward in terms of pursuing this path of science for football.
Great, yeah. So I think Vince can jump in at any time, but to me, I mean, football changed my life. I owe, who I became to, obviously my mom, but, football was a key player into making me who I am right now, and then into giving me an ability to actually chase my dreams. And so, I can appreciate as a scientist that, there are risks in the game, whether it's, concussions or physical injuries but the idea is that for so many years, we let football be this amazing platform for young men and women to grow, but we never actually gave it a chance to become better. And so I think that what I learned as a scientist over time is that science can allow us to push the boundaries of knowledge. And what we wanted to do with the Elite NeuroKinetix is really provide football with a scientific platform to actually make that happen.
Vince, you've seen the social science of football and how it applies to the participants. Is that the main driver for you behind this?
Absolutely. Just like Alan just mentioned, football is something that really changes lives. And not only did it change ours, but I see it now doing the same thing for the kids that are coming up from all kinds of backgrounds. And their passion for the game is just as strong as we had beforehand, and is just moving along. And I think that football is just such an exceptional game that it was an honor for me to mix my passion with work and make this happen.
You've been working with this group now for a few months, 4 or 5 months on this before we've launched this project. Tell me the type of momentum that's built up with the consultation and the teamwork behind this.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that their team has been fantastic, energized and excited about being able to get this partnership rolling, similar to what we have been. And I think for us, we're always looking at ways that we can provide tools and resources for our coaches to be able to provide our participants with the best experience they can. And I think this is another opportunity for us to strengthen that and to be able to give back some more to the game that we all love and that we all want to see grow and strengthen. And for us specifically, it's about how do we develop kids to get to the national team level, how do we keep kids safe, and how do we keep growing. And I think this is the one thing that we're really all on the same page with, that we can continue to keep this process moving.
So how do we keep kids safe through this project? Tell people the basics about the science behind the project and the approach to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just back to your point, Aaron, that the idea is to create more tools. And I think that we all agree on this, on this table, that in this tournament, that football is an amazing game, and that football is constantly, it's constantly growing as a sport. What we want to do again is to find ways to actually optimize that growth with data. The basic idea is that, in our opinion, the risk for injury is in the movement. And so the way that we move on the football field, so the way that we engage in contact, whether it's a block or a tackle, is actually determining your risk of injury. And so what we wanted to create is a functional movement assessment. And so something that's very specific to football, and so changing in direction and then entering or engaging in contact, and then a way to actually score that. And so the simple way to think about this is just putting a number on safety. The same way that we've used the 40-yard dash for years now to determine how fast a player can run, we want to do something very similar for the way that players engage in contact. And all that to, one, allow for the players to know, where do they stand in terms of development and where they should be going. And so what are their technical weaknesses and how can we actually make them better? But also for coaches to know their players and say, okay, I have 30, 40, 50 players on this roster. Some of them have weaknesses and some of them have strengths. And how do I actually target those weaknesses using data-informed interventions that we can develop through Elite NeuroKinetix?
So on the safety side, then, this isn't just about eliminating head contact. This is about improving the situation for the athlete in all kinds of injury scenarios.
Absolutely. And I
correct?
think, head injuries is always getting the most attention in football. But in general, right, like football is a physical game. And so you're going to have injuries that result from the context of the game. And I think that our main point is that if we can fix the movement, if we can allow players to not only be safer, but actually be better players, they're going to be staying on the football field for longer, and they're going to have opportunities to have longer and healthier careers, which is going to be stemming from the fact that they're just more performant. And so it's really important to understand that performance and safety, for years we've thought of them as like two independent parties. But I think that our main thing as a group is that they're actually codependent. Safety is a function of performance, and performance is a function of safety. And then working them together actually allows us to develop players in the way that's the most optimized possible.
Okay, so we got two codependent guys here. We got safety and we got coaching and performance. Tell me about the coaching and performance side in terms of mining this data and what sort of advantages that gives the coach.
Well, first of all, for the people that, let's say for the people at home that has all these technical terms, the way that I like to put it is, imagine a world where you would go to school and the children would just move along from year to year without ever taking exams. Now, I know that kids that are watching are super excited about this idea, but the basis behind exam is to get feedback on how you're doing personally and how your classroom is doing personally, so that you can really target what you're going to teach and what you're going to reinforce and how you're going to change your curriculum. But this idea can replicate itself in football through our system, right? So the idea is that as a coach, you have limited amount of time, limited amount of resources, and you do the best that you can with what you have to provide the best experience for players. And when we come in, this is what we like to think about ourselves, is an assessment, an evaluation that coaches can use as a tool to better target their intervention on the field. So they can know not only where their team sits in terms of certain criteria of performance and safety, but they can also know how to define their practices in the upcoming weeks and the upcoming months, so that they can target those weaknesses and really get better on the field and in practice on both sides of the game, which is to make players safer and to make them more performant.
So with this, how does this grow what Football Canada has with safe contact? Because I know you're going through a process right now of reevaluating safe contact, rebuilding safe contact into something bigger. How does this feed into that?
So right now we're at the great stage of, you had mentioned, so we're reevaluating safe contact in a way of how do we keep moving with the times that so more data comes out, more research comes out, specifically about how can we make the kids perform better and be safer. So for us, it's about how do we build that or strengthen the foundation that we already have with safe contact, using data, using analytics to be able to then inform ourselves better when we have coaching clinics, when we have drill categories for our coaches, when we have, so we talk about intervention. We have right now lots of great intervention, but when do we use them? How do we use them? How can we strengthen those interventions for the coaches? So it's about being able to inform our coaching with better information. And that, as we move forward, our game is rapidly changing all the time, whether it's offense, defense, but tackling and blocking has changed from the start of time of football till now, and it'll keep changing. So we want to keep ahead of the curve. And one of the big things we're always talking about in long-term athlete development, a 9-year-old kid is not the same as a 16-year-old kid. So the development of that 16-year-old and a 9-year-old is different, and we want to know how they're different, know how to get it the proper stance and block based on the ability of that athlete. And I think for us, the more information, the better.
And that's a great point to make here that, if you think of development as a player, whether you start at 8, 9 years old or 10 years old or 15 years old, players, they come in different shapes and skill sets. And I think allowing us to actually monitor that development using numbers, using data, which is, what we wanted to bring in with Football Canada is really critical in, one, assessing our own principles. And so how good are we at allowing these players to become the best version of themselves? And then if we're not doing a great job, well, how can we actually change that to enhance that? right? So it's really important that we can use data to inform where we're going and actually manipulate those developmental curves for each player, because we can individualize those treatments and interventions, per province or per coaching staffs, or you can think of all these different levels of learning and teaching that we can do. All that because technology has advanced to a point now where we can really integrate science as a fundamental core to coaching.
We're talking about what you guys are doing, but what about from a coaching perspective? Talk to me about ease of use. How does a coach approach what you guys are doing so they can input the information and get something back in return?
Yeah, if you think of coaching, when you're a coach, you have a limited amount of time, right? And so even with respect to safe contact, if you have a 2-hour practice, you may spend 15 to 20 minutes on safe contact. But what do you start working with? Where do you actually start? There's so many things that you can work on to make a player better. And so what we want to do is, we provide the coaches with report cards, with statistics, and things that are simple to look at, but actually allow you to optimize and individualize that training for your team. And so Football Canada, this tournament is a perfect example. You get 40 players that come from all different places across the country. They all have different skill sets and level of, proficiency in terms of tackling. And so what if within this 1 week of training, we can actually target those individual weaknesses one by one and say, you know what, by the end of this week, you're going to be a better player because we assessed and targeted the things that you were bad at. And so it really allows us to optimize that coaching in a way that it's easy for them to interpret, because we talk the football language, right, which is really important, and also because we can really individualize those interventions per team and per athletes.
Vincent, you got anything to add on that from a coaching perspective?
Well, absolutely. We as a coach, I wanted to make sure that everything would be as simple as possible, because as I've mentioned before, and as Alan just mentioned, time is always limited. As a coach, you do the best that you can in a limited section of time. And so to make it sure that it would be very easy, just to give an example, once we go on the field with the players just go through a small combine where we collect the data. And once we're finished with this, Alan just mentioned, we provide report cards, we provide feedback on the type of drills that they could make, we provide feedback on the type of weaknesses that they have, on the type of strength that they have, and most importantly, we provide a huge database of videos of their own players that they can themselves watch and just go online, access it through our files, and then just see every one of their players, how they did on those drills and how they could do better. And so for us to make it as simple as possible, we've created a platform, and so we're hoping that coaches can just log in and then get the information that they need, build their practices, and they're good to go.
One of the things that I got by talking with this group was that it's a constant process. It's a constant evolution. And when you take a look at what some professional leagues have done in the past and what some other sports have done in the past, is they put the conclusion forward and said, we're just working to a conclusion. One of the great things about this is that this is always changing. I think there's a recognition that safety is something that's always changing.
Yes.
Is that the impression that you get from working with them for the last half a year?
Yes, absolutely. And us as an organization, we're always trying to keep our policy procedure as current as possible. And when we're working with things as fluent as safety, we have to be always keeping ahead of the curve, and we can't do that unless we have great partnerships. We can't do that unless we have access to new technology. You make a great point that as technology advances, it actually makes it a lot easier for us to be able to collect data. So from a top-down perspective, we want to be able to have as much good and informed data as we can to make good and informed decisions, because we know, as everybody else says, for us to make the best decisions for the youth and the coaches, it has to be informed, and we're really looking forward to being able to reinforce the policy procedures we have and to strengthen and create better policies and procedures as we move forward, so that our pathways from young as 4 or 5 all the way up to our national teams, as we see this week, are performing at the best that they can.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point to think about in terms of the big picture. And so when you think of a player that's progressing through the system, through the game for many years, with this approach, with using the data we can store over time, is that we can actually monitor that. We can monitor the development over time and see how well they're progressing, and perhaps when things aren't going as good as we thought, or they're not reaching the targeted points that we want them to be at, we can can actually work on that right away. We don't have to wait for them to get hurt. And that to me is, as from an injury prevention perspective, and as a scientist and as a coach, that's really important, because if you can help me prevent injuries, you're going to make my team better, but you're also going to make my athletes healthier over time, and that's so important.
Yeah, well, and one of the things we always talk about is that, yes, injuries will happen, irregardless of the sport, irregardless of what you're doing, but prevention should always take place over management. We need to prevent as much as we can, and there are a lot of opportunities that we can do that, and we've seen that. We talk about, we have a lot of great partnerships with leagues across the world that are getting really great data, and for us, it's about taking best practices. It's about working jointly with collaborations like this to be able to work as a community to push football where it needs to.
Right. Yeah, and this is just not the Canadian community. This is the global football community, and while this is a great start in Canada, I'm of the belief, I think Aaron's of the belief too, that this is something that can go beyond our borders with our connections in the global football community.
Yeah, I think I think our vision for us is really if we can provide accessible technology with optimized coaching for every player that plays football, throughout this international scale, that's the vision. We want football to be a platform to grow, and we don't want injuries to be in the way. And so if we can take these proactive injury prevention measures and then collaborate with all these amazing sport organizations, I think that we can, because this is so scalable and because this is so simple, we can use these principles and we can use these technology advances to really allow us to reach the football community on the global scale and make a big difference.
Well, and one of the great things about this, from our perspective, is it puts Football Canada into a position when it comes to safety that we're taking a leadership position in this country on it. And I really have to thank your group for approaching us and getting this going and coming on board. And I thank Aaron, you and the staff for working together over these last 6 months so we could have a day like today where we could roll this out. And certainly there will be more information coming forward about the partnership as we move along.